The silence in that boardroom lasted exactly 4 seconds. Vincent Harlow counted them. He was mopping the floor just outside the glass partition when the lead negotiator from the Dunmore Group pushed back from the table, looked at the man in the gray custodial uniform standing in the doorway, and said nothing. No one said anything. 4 seconds in a room full of people who were paid to fill silences with words. Then the chairman of Aldermere Capital, a man named Frederick Osey, stood up slowly from his chair at the head of the table and asked, in a voice that carried the careful measure of someone choosing each word like a step across ice, "How long were you standing there?" Vincent said. "Long enough." The Aldermere building sat at the corner of King and York in downtown Toronto. 41 floors of glass and steel that caught the morning light off Lake Ontario and threw it back at the street below in long, blinding strips. Vincent Harlow had worked nights there for 11 years. He knew every service corridor, every stairwell that rattled in the wind, every elevator that ran slow. He knew which executives stayed past 9, which ones left half-eaten lunches in their offices, which ones came in early and sat alone in the dark before their assistants arrived. He was not a young man. At 63, his hair had gone fully white, and there was a deliberate slowness to the way he moved that people tended to mistake for age. It wasn't age. It was the particular stillness of someone who had learned, at great cost, that most things that seemed urgent were not. He drove to work in a 2009 Civic with a dent in the rear quarter panel that he'd never bothered fixing. He wore the same 3 sets of uniforms in rotation, kept them pressed, and showed up 7 minutes early every shift. He ate his lunch alone in the maintenance room on the 3rd floor, a thermos of coffee and whatever he'd packed at home. Usually something plain, rice and chicken, occasionally soup if it was cold outside. His supervisor, a man named Doug Betr, who was 20 years younger and spoke with the cheerful authority of someone who had never doubted himself, liked Vincent fine. Vincent was reliable, invisible, and never complained. In Doug's estimation, those were the 3 virtues that mattered most in a facilities employee. What Doug did not know, what almost no one at Aldermere Capital knew, was that Vincent Harlow had once sat on the other side of those glass partitions, not as a visitor, not as support staff. As a principal, he had been, in another life, the co-founder of a mid-sized engineering consultancy in Vancouver that had been acquired in 2001 for just over $40 million. After the acquisition, he had spent 8 years working in international infrastructure development, Ethiopia, Malaysia, the Philippines, the southern coast of France, which was where he had picked up the languages. Not studied them formally, not in any classroom sense. He had simply lived inside them until they became his. French first, then Tagalog out of necessity, then Arabic because one of his closest colleagues in Addis Ababa had refused to conduct any meeting of substance in English, and Vincent had found after 6 months of sitting at the edge of those conversations that he agreed with him. Mandarin came after Shanghai, in the years before everything fell apart. His wife, Carol, had died in 2009. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, progressed quickly in the way those things sometimes did. Their daughter, Renata, was 17. Vincent had sold the Vancouver condo, the investment properties, the consulting interest he still held in a partnership in Kuala Lumpur. Sold all of it over the course of about 18 months, not in a panic, but with the deliberate clarity of someone who had decided that none of it meant what he had once believed it meant. He moved Renata to Toronto because her grandmother lived there. He took the night cleaning job because it kept his days free to be home when she came back from school. She was 31 now, a pediatric nurse in Hamilton. She called on Sundays. He had kept enough to be comfortable. More than comfortable, in truth. The number in his accounts would have surprised people, but he had found in those years after Carol died that the size of a number stopped mattering at a certain point. What mattered was showing up, being present. Watching the light change over the lake from the 41st floor at 4 in the morning, running his mop in long, slow passes across the marble, with the whole city spread out in dark and quiet below him. He was not unhappy. This was something he had considered carefully and concluded with confidence. He was not unhappy. The Dunmore Group arrived on a Tuesday. Vincent knew about the deal the way he knew about most things at Aldermere, not from the memos that circulated through the official channels, but from the ambient conversation of the building itself. He heard things. The cleaning staff always heard things, because the people who worked in those offices had long ago stopped registering them as an audience. A custodian with a mop became part of the furniture, indistinguishable from the carpet or the potted plants in the corners. The Dunmore Group was a consortium based out of Lyon, with significant holdings across West Africa and Southeast Asia. They were in preliminary discussions with Aldermere about a co-investment framework for a series of infrastructure projects: ports, logistics networks, a rail corridor in Senegal. The numbers being floated, from what Vincent had gathered in fragments over 3 weeks of overheard phone calls, ran somewhere between 800 million and $1.5 billion. Frederick Osey, who had been Aldermere's chairman for 4 years and whose father had been a civil engineer in Accra, had championed the deal internally against considerable resistance from the board. 2 senior managing directors, a man named Philip Swain and a woman named Catherine Lorne, had been quietly opposed since the beginning. Vincent didn't know the specifics of their objections, only that they were frequent, coordinated, and consistently framed as concerns about due diligence and risk exposure. The lead interpreter had flown in from Montreal. She was joined by 3 associates. On the second day, 2 of them left without explanation, and a replacement was sourced locally. By the 3rd day, the arrangement had quietly collapsed. Something in the technical language of the infrastructure agreements, the way the documentation shifted between standard French and a particular Lyonnese legal dialect, had outpaced what the available translators could track with confidence. Vincent learned this the way he learned most things. He was restocking the supply closet on 38 when he heard Philip Swain's assistant on her phone in the corridor, her voice tight. "The Dunmore people are getting impatient." They switched to Wolof in the middle of the morning session, and nobody could follow it. "Frederick is embarrassed. He's trying to find someone from the consulate." That evening, Vincent was running the buffer along the hallway outside the main boardroom on 39 when he heard the voices inside shift. It began in English, formal and strained, the kind of English that people use when they are being very careful to be misunderstood. Then one of the Dunmore representatives, a heavy-set man with silver-framed glasses whom Vincent had seen arriving each morning in a dark SUV, said something in French to the man beside him, not the public French of the negotiations. The private kind, the kind that assumed no one else in the room would catch it. Vincent turned off the buffer. He stood still in the corridor and listened. What he heard over the next 9 minutes was a conversation between 3 of the Dunmore representatives, conducted across French and Wolof, and at one point a brief exchange in what he recognized as Bambara, a language he had picked up partially during an infrastructure project in Mali in 2005 and had never entirely lost. The content of that conversation was not ambiguous. They were not discussing the deal structure. They were discussing a separate arrangement they had made, or were in the process of making, with Philip Swain and Catherine Lorne directly. The terms, as best Vincent could follow them, involved a significant side commission routed through a holding company in Luxembourg. In exchange, Swain and Lorne would ensure the Aldermere board approved the co-investment framework with a specific set of provisions. Provisions that, Vincent understood from the fragments of technical language he caught, would effectively limit Aldermere's upside while protecting the Dunmore Group's exposure in the Senegal corridor. Frederick Osey, from what Vincent had heard over months, knew nothing about this arrangement. Vincent stood in the corridor for a long moment after the voices inside had shifted back to English. The buffer sat idle at his feet. The hallway was empty. Through the glass partition he could see the back of Frederick Osey's head, the careful attention he brought to every gesture the Dunmore delegation made, the particular dignity of a man trying very hard to do something he believed in. He thought about what Carol would have said. She had been practical in the way that kind people sometimes are, without the softness that the word usually implies. She would not have told him what to do. She would have waited for him to say what he already knew, and then she would have nodded. He picked up his mop bucket and walked to the end of the corridor. Then he turned around and walked back. He knocked on the boardroom door. The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something unexpected has broken through the surface of a controlled situation. Philip Swain's expression tightened. The Dunmore representatives, there were 4 of them at the table, showed no reaction at all, which was itself a kind of reaction. Vincent said, in English, that he was sorry to interrupt and that he needed to speak with Mr. Osei privately for a moment. Philip Swain was the first to respond. His voice was smooth and dismissive in the practiced way of someone who had spent a career making people feel that their concerns were understandable, but ultimately not the business of the people in the room. He said that the session was at a critical point, and that if Vincent needed to flag a maintenance issue, he should contact the facilities desk directly. Vincent looked at him. Then he looked at Frederick Osei. He said, in French, not English, not the careful formal French of the interpreters, but the working French of Lyon and the surrounding departments, the French of trade agreements and municipal contracts, that what he needed to discuss concerned the afternoon session specifically, and that he thought Mr. Osei would prefer to hear it before rather than after. The room changed. One of the Dunmore representatives, the man with the silver-framed glasses, put down his pen. Frederick Osei stood up and said quietly that they would take 5 minutes. They stood in the side office adjacent to the boardroom. Frederick Osei, his general counsel, a woman named Priscilla Fontaine, who had joined them from the corridor, and Vincent. The chairman had the kind of face that gave nothing away until it did, and Vincent watched the moment when it did, as he laid out, as plainly and specifically as he could, what he had heard and when he had heard it. He was careful. He did not speculate. He did not frame things as accusations. He reported, in sequence, the words he had understood, the words he had partially had not understood, keeping each category distinct. Priscilla Fontaine wrote without looking up from her notepad. Frederick Osei asked 3 questions, each one precise, and then said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, in Bambara, specifically, what was the word they used for the Luxembourg arrangement? Vincent told him. The chairman nodded once, slowly, as if confirming something he had already suspected, but had not yet allowed himself to believe. What happened over the following 72 hours was not the kind of thing that resolved itself cleanly or quickly. Vincent did not witness most of it. He went back to his shift, finished the floors on 39, did the lobby at midnight, drove home in the Civic. Renata called the next morning, a Sunday, and he told her the broad outline, not the details, and she said, Dad, in the particular tone she used when she was proud of him and exasperated by him simultaneously, which was a tone he had always found comforting. He heard, secondhand through Doug Petrie, that there had been an emergency board meeting on the Thursday. He heard, through the ambient conversation of the building, that Philip Swain had left the office in the early afternoon and not come back. Catherine Lorne's assistant was seen packing boxes on the Friday. The Dunmore delegation departed without a signed agreement. 2 weeks passed. Vincent ran his routes, stocked his supplies, ate his lunch in the maintenance room. He did not hear anything official. He had not expected to. He was a custodian. He had told someone something important, and the important thing had been used, and that was, from his perspective, the end of his involvement. He was not bitter about this. He had not intervened in order to be rewarded. He had intervened because he had been standing in a corridor outside a room where something dishonest was happening to a person he had, from a careful distance, come to respect, and because there had been a moment, a clear, specific moment, the kind that doesn't announce itself as significant, but that you know immediately, when not speaking had stopped being a neutral option. On the 3rd Thursday of the following month, Frederick Osei walked into the maintenance room on the 3rd floor at 7:10 in the evening. Vincent was at the small table with his thermos and a container of leftover pasta. He looked up. Frederick Osei, who was 61 years old, who had grown up in Kumasi before his family moved to Montreal, who had built Aldermere Capital over 23 years from a small fixed-income shop into one of the more respected mid-market investment firms in the country, sat down across from him in the one other chair in the room. He was not wearing his jacket. He said, "I want to know how you heard what you heard." Vincent told him, not just the incident on 39, the whole of it. The years in Ethiopia, in Malaysia, in Shanghai. The infrastructure work, the project in Mali where he had spent 4 months with a team from Segu and had absorbed the shape of Bambara the way you absorb a place when you live inside it with attention. Frederick Osei listened the way that certain people listen, with his whole body, without the restless energy of someone waiting for their own turn to speak. When Vincent finished, the chairman said, "Why cleaning?" It was not a condescending question. The man had asked it the way you ask something when you genuinely do not understand and genuinely want to. Vincent thought about it for a moment. He said, "My wife died in 2009. My daughter was in high school. I needed to be home during the day. And after your daughter grew up. By then I didn't see a good reason to change." Frederick Osey looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "The Dunmore situation is not fully resolved. We are in contact with the relevant regulatory bodies and there is an ongoing review. I have also been in contact with the Dunmore Group's parent organization in Lyon, separately from the consortium, about a restructured engagement. They are interested. The people who were conducting the side negotiation no longer represent them." He paused. "The challenge," he said, "is that I need someone who can operate as an independent technical advisor on the infrastructure components of any restructured agreement. Someone with direct field experience in West Africa and Southeast Asia. Someone who understands the language, all of the language that those negotiations require." He did not say, "I want it to be you." He let the states sit. Vincent looked at his thermos. He looked at the door. He thought about the 41st floor at 4 in the morning, the lake dark below, the mop moving in slow passes across the marble. He said, "What would the engagement look like?" "Project-based. You would not be an Aldermere employee. You would advise directly and independently, on a retainer for each specific transaction. You would have no administrative obligations, no office hours, no corporate politics, no uniform," Vincent said. Frederick Osey allowed himself a small smile. "That would be at your discretion." Vincent was quiet for a moment. He poured the last of his coffee from the thermos, looked at it, did not drink it. He said, "I would want one condition. Name it. I keep the cleaning job. Part-time if you need the shift covered, but I keep it. I like the building at night." The chairman looked at him with the expression of a man recalibrating something. Then he said, "That is possibly the most unusual condition I have ever been offered." "You asked," Vincent said. "I did." A pause. "It's agreed." They shook hands in the maintenance room on the 3rd floor of the Aldermere building, under the fluorescent light, with the smell of industrial cleaner faint in the air. No one witnessed it. There was no paperwork that evening, no announcement, no press release. The agreement was made the way that certain real agreements are made, between two people who understood, without needing to say it, what had been exchanged. Vincent drove home in the Civic. He made tea. He sat for a while at the kitchen table with the window open, the September air coming in off the street, and he thought about Carol, as he often did in the evenings. Not with grief exactly. That had changed over the years into something quieter, less sharp, more like the awareness of an empty chair that you had learned to sit beside. He thought she would have said something dry and exactly right about the whole situation. She had a gift for that. Renata called the next morning, not because it was Sunday. It wasn't, but because something had told her to. He answered on the 2nd ring. "Everything okay?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Something came up." She waited. She had her mother's patience when she chose to use it, he told her. There was a pause on the line and then she laughed. Not the polite kind, the real kind, the kind that meant she was genuinely surprised, which he found at 63 still one of the better sounds in the world. "Dad," she said finally, "only you." He poured his coffee. Outside, the morning light was coming in low and golden through the kitchen window, the way it did in September in Toronto when the air was clear. "I start in 3 weeks," he said. "Are you nervous?" He considered this honestly. "No," he said. "I think I'm ready."